Welcome to Conscious Dominance, a DSRX studio production. These weekly conversations explore how to approach mindful leadership and inner dominance within the powerful container of committed, intentional relationships. Join Eric as he invites new dialogues, sharing practical insights for how the craft of consciousness opens the aperture to love, serve, and connect with unwavering presence.
Eric, it's good to see
Good
you.
to see you in the year 2025.
You've been through the gauntlet already in 25.
Yeah, it's been quite a year. Us individually and us publicly. I mean, the public as well. I'm talking to you and you were in Texas and you fled winter and winter followed you. And
Well, I feel like January's kind of been winter everywhere
yeah,
in some way or another. Florida, I saw Florida get 9 inches of snow
Yeah.
in Pensacola. Yeah. Nobody's escaped this year.
no everybody's getting something. That's a reference to Santa Claus and Saturday Night Live, but it's also sort of like what we're going through. I feel like everybody's getting something. Everybody's feeling something. Everybody's going through something. Today I want to talk about taking action and the necessity of taking action as a man and as the masculine, and how we need to be in a space of doing and action with three caveats, with three underlying sort of lenses with which to approach taking action. And first being taking responsibility for our action and previous actions that we have taken. Two, not being reactive, that our action isn't from a place of reactivity, that it's a place of taking responsibility and showing our capacity to choose how we respond, and not being from a fight or flight, but like literally from this place of response that's a grounded response. And then third, from integrity. And so if we could think of these three as the three pillars of taking action of conscious dominance: the taking responsibility, not being reactive, and having integrity. And we've spoken about all three of these, but I wanted to really put them under a lens that's very simple, that the importance of power, the importance of taking action. And I feel like this day and age, it's so easy for us to just dismiss the masculine and dismiss power and dismiss taking action because it's toxic or it's doing damage or it's it's disruptive. Well, yes, it is. That's the point. And
Something needs
yes. And if we need to counteract that, the point of the masculine is that there are multiple characters taking action. Like, if you don't like it, take action. If you don't like your life, take action. And we're not going to get anywhere by not taking action. And I think as someone who's very connected to a more conscious, spiritual, evolved, I put that in quotes, space, it can be that has its own toxicity. And I think one of the biggest ways that it becomes toxic is that you start rising above matter, and you start feeling like not taking action is somehow holy, and that until you're in some rarefied air where you've purified all of your elements and all of yourself, can't take any action, can't do anything. And in that, in and of itself, you're not taking responsibility for your life. And so that's why if you put first and foremost, take responsibility as your guiding principle, it forces you to take action. And so if you take as a guiding principle to take responsibility, that is making sure that you have your finances in order. That means your health in order. That means the people that you love. Take action and take responsibility. and then to do it in a non-reactive way and to have integrity. The integrity that we talked about is an integrity that is verb. This is you with your values, you with your capacity to own what you want, who you are, your needs, your desires, and not making it something where you're a martyr, where you're taking action as a martyr and you're resenting that, or you're doing it from some place that's trying to defend some childhood. Anyway, I think that's enough of a little intro. I would love to hear your thoughts on this as
Well, kind of the guiding principle between all three of those things, responsibility, integrity, non-reactivity, is living a proactive life. We talked about this way back, I think, in probably the first season, where we were talking about the dominance of living an organized life. If I'm not being proactive in my life, if I'm not taking action out of a desire to go somewhere, then you're either being proactive or being reactive. So if we want to be non-reactive, we don't just stop reacting, because then we just shut down. It's shifting into responsibility in how we respond to things, which then equates to taking proactive approach to life, taking a proactive approach to how we lead, taking a proactive approach to changing the things in our world around us into what we want them to be, or into our highest vision of what we think is possible in alignment with our values. And that's integrity, right? You can't live in integrity if you let trash, you let negativity, you let destructive things show up and be present in your life that aren't in alignment with your values. Like that's not a dominant life. That is a reactive life. If you're just letting destructive things exist in your space. So looking at all three of those things, take action, absolutely, but take action from where? Like what's motivating the action? What's driving the action that we're taking? Because I tell you what, from age 18 to 36, the first 18 years of my adult life, I took a lot of action. I built a huge business. I made a lot of money. I did all kinds of shit. I was standing on stages with governors, and I did all kinds of really impressive look things. I took a lot of action, but all the action was being motivated from trying to prove myself, trying to look cool, trying to look important, trying to be perceived as like good in some way. And tons of action, but there was no integrity to it. It wasn't an integrity to who I was. And that's why it eventually collapsed and fell apart and didn't work. And I got fat and miserable and everything else. Because if you're running away from who you actually are with your actions, it doesn't matter how much action you take. You see this all the time where guys will go to the gym and like bust their ass and get in super great shape, and jacked and huge, but they're still miserable on the inside. On the inside, they're still the fat little kid who feels insecure, and they're still being completely controlled. So you're right in that you have to change the motivating factor for your action. Otherwise, the action is just taking you farther away from any sense of embodied dominance.
That's why that integrity is so vital on all the levels of what that word means. And going back to what we talked about, being impeccable with your word, inside and outside, really lining up with our inner voice, our inner wounding. One of the big journey has been through feeling really worthless and a core wound. And I didn't know that until I took away my vices. I mean, this is why we have to sometimes stop acting when we figure out that we're just being reactive and we're out of integrity and we're not taking responsibility. That is the time to stop acting. And there is a point there where you're like, oh shit, this action is not doing these three things. Stop, assess, your mind, you're still taking action in a way, because you're like, just thinking can be taking action, and then moving into a new lane. I think if yours was about making money and about being public in your wealth, mine was about womenizing. I think my way to feel better about myself was in having multiple women, and seeing myself as the dom and the man, and like being able to play the game and pick up women, and did it in a way that was where I lied, was manipulative, unconscious, and had a lot of, like, you probably had some fun times and had some times that were enjoyable. But at the core, when I was sitting with myself and I was with myself and nobody was around, felt like absolute fucking shit, and needed the next hit, and then came into some other, intoxicants and other ways to kind of come to that. And it wasn't until it got all stripped away and there was just me with my kids and nobody, that I was able to finally kind of like look in the mirror and be like, oh my God, I'm gross. Like, the only thing that I can look at you and be like, okay, is the fact that I'm taking responsibility for my kids. And that was like, okay, that's a step. It's a step. And then the step. And then the step. And in this journey, those three words of taking responsibility, not reacting, and being in integrity have been quite a journey for me. And they all work on each other. And the one for me that's the biggest challenge is the not being reactive. I can be all integrity I want and all the taking responsibility I want, and still my body, feel that sort of flame. But you've really helped me, and just Rachel too, in that, me just leaving and just being like, you know what, taking 100% responsibility, that, and like being adamant about, if I am in that reactive and flushed and flame state, the action I need to take is a action of consciousness away from the situation. And I think that that's been a really important step in this. And I know that I've talked about that, but I was curious for you, in your journey of these three, of taking action, how you resonate with this idea of there is a place for like the pause, or not taking action in that, like a caveat. Like, there's always a paradox too, right? We always will come out and say, this is the way it is. And but then there are times when there's nuance to it.
Whatever's going on with me is happening in me. It's not happening out there.
Mm-hmm.
She isn't doing it to me. You aren't doing it to me. I'm feeling this way. I'm the one having I'm the one having the response. So am I going to let that feeling I have in me be the motivating factor for the action that I take? If it is, then I'm going to be reactive. But if I can pause long enough to see what's going on, I might be able to, instead, action that I take be, can I really be with this experience that I'm having? I listen to it. What does it have to say to me? Can I not run away from it? Can I not go grab a drink? Can I not try to push her away? Can I not, do whatever maybe the programming is make me feel like I want to do? But to actually, can I take the action of sitting down and going, this feels impossible. This feels like hell. And noticing the tension, noticing the clenching, noticing the desire to go, drink, the desire to go, even using a workout as a reaction to that inner feeling. Like, it's still, even if you're using healthy coping mechanisms, there's still coping mechanisms, and it's still you trying to avoid the feeling that you're having. And the longer you avoid that, you're still letting that thing control you.
This is the next
but
layer.
If you can sit with it and take responsibility again for it, and just listen, take a deep, what does it have to teach me? I'm not going to run away.
You're speaking such truth bombs right there. This is exactly what I, in the last 2 weeks, have had to face because, like you, Rachel and I are living remote and we're living in a small room. It's not a house. The rest of the house is other people are in. It's winter and below zero. And I have had to sit with, there's no place for me to go. Plus, I've had an injury and I've been recovering from an injury. So I've had to do exactly what you've said. I couldn't go work out. I could not go for my walk. I couldn't do all the healthy coping mechanisms. I literally had to sit in my stew in the bed next to her when I felt like absolute piece of shit trash. And I had no way of getting out of that feeling that it was healthy or not healthy. I had to just sit with it and sit with it. Yes, there were times that I listened to music because that was helpful. Yes, there's a book that I listened to that was helpful. But there were times I just had to sit there, and there were nights where I couldn't sleep. And yes, it was painful, and pain has this wonderful way. I'm recovering from a shoulder procedure that it was been. If you've listened to the podcast, you might know that I had a torn tendons and a broken scapula, and had just recently had a shoulder procedure on it, and it's kept me really confronting my capacity to take action and to really also my self-worth based upon my capacity to take action. And so actually in the action that I needed to take, especially around my reactivity and being inflamed, was actually a space of non-action and was a space of like intentional sitting and non-activity. That can be an action in and of itself. Sometimes we take action to avoid the feeling that we're feeling. We often take action, like you said, and sometimes you're blessed with workaholism and you're rewarded for it. You're blessed with a capacity to work out and you're rewarded by it, or you're blessed with a capacity to pick up women and you're rewarded with it. But there will be a time where your feelings will catch up with you, and
You don't get away with anything.
when
If you're running away from yourself, you don't get away with it.
Exactly. And I've had to sit with that and sit with that and sit with that. And Rachel does not make it easier for me. She doesn't make it worse, but she's not. And I've told her, I do not want you to coddle me when I'm in those moments. If I am asking for things, sex, or when I'm in that state, do not give it to me. That's like giving an addict the thing. That's codependent enabling behavior. And that has done more to shift our relationship, or my growth, I would say, and even our relationship and her respect of me, than anything, which is that she's like, oh, he could do it. He can do this work. He needs to suffer. He needs to feel his shit. He needs to feel like the worthless little piece of shit that he feels like he is, because he actually isn't. But he needs to develop his inner man, inner king, inner masculine, this part of ourself that can sit with the little boy part of ourself. It is only the masculine that heals ultimately the masculine. And this is the thing that we, as men, it's when I started going to men, it's when I started going to my own inner masculine that I really got to the next level of healing. As long as I kept thinking it was a feminine that I needed, or a feminine energy, I kept going to, yes, nature can help me feel better. Art can help me feel better. But it's truly in a suffering that where you are taking responsibility, you're in your integrity, and you're not reacting, and you're able to hold yourself in the midst of that, that you start to really feel like you're fucking in your fucking balls and in your cough, and you're in this space. It's in that. And I think that sounds so, when you're not having been the other side of it, it can sound very cold and unloving. Yeah, fuck yes, it is. Because you're not dependent on anyone else to soothe you when you're going through it. And it goes back to all these stories of heroes and people that have been in the midst of these trying situations, and they've been able to rise to the occasion. There is no Calvary. They are it for themselves. And it's especially in those moments that are really challenging that we can find our own inner solace. It's inside of us, but it can only be developed in pain and in challenging moments. And that's where I've had this physical pain, and it's been the greatest teacher. It's changed my whole life. To lose my right arm and to be, I'm the weak. I was telling Andrew before the podcast, I can't do a fucking push-up. I, I, I can't grip. I can't punch. I can't raise my arm and lift anything. It brought me to tears. I was so debilitated before this procedure. And then right when this procedure was coming out of it, there's been some challenges with some things due to the fires and other circumstances where it was like the financial situation, and it was just all of these things stacking on top of it. And not having a home. And I just felt like the weight of it all. And then I was like, no, I could sit here. And it was like my capacity to not being reactive, to be in my integrity, to not collapse, to not fall apart. Yes, in the middle of the night, collapsed. I felt all those things. But when the next day came, I came up, I woke up on the normal time, I showed up, I did my work, I did my thing because I was able to hold myself in the middle of the night. And I gave myself that space to do that and to collapse in the middle of the night. But it was hell. It was fucking hell.
I want to come back to something you said about like feeling cold, that approach feeling cold.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a certain amount of like sober clarity that you have to have with those
Mm-hmm.
experiences, because the reality is like they're not true.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have a sober, cold, crystal fucking clear look at yourself
Mm-hmm.
to be able to look inward and say, no, fuck you to that part of that thinks that I'm worthless. Fuck you to the part of telling these lies about the fact that I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a certain amount of coldness to that. But the point, and this is something that I want to call forward here for the sake of the guys listening to this. This is not a call to basically shut yourself down and become cold and hard.
Mm-hmm.
This is a call to move beyond the necessity of acting out of all of that self-protection.
Yes.
Because I don't know who the quote is by, and I probably won't get the words exactly right. The idea of this is there's a certain amount of warmth
Mm-hmm.
that only strength can afford.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain amount of gentleness that only
Mm-hmm.
true strength can afford to have.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we are really beyond all of that bullshit that we told ourselves, the stories that we told
Mm-hmm.
ourselves about who we are, we don't come across to the world as cold-hearted,
Mm-hmm.
as rigid.
It's true.
We can be extraordinarily warm, open,
Mm-hmm.
loving,
And present.
present. And that is what allows, back to the topic of taking. So often we think about certain things as only from the frame of reactivity. I want to use anger as an example. Because if we've only ever experienced certain feelings in our body as a reactive version of that feeling,
Mm-hmm.
it can be really tough or almost impossible to conceptualize, for example, anger as a kind, loving
Mm-hmm.
emotion that we take from a proactive stance.
Yes. Yes.
If we've only ever experienced anger as reaction to our own inner discomfort and then a lashing out
Mm-hmm.
to try to protect that thing inside of us that we're uncomfortable with, we can just think, oh, anger is bad.
Yes. Yes.
And then we can shut down an entire part of our emotional experience, which is an absolutely essential thing for us as men. We need our anger. We just need to harness it.
Yes. What you're saying.
And so looking at something like anger as a proactive motivator for healthy masculine action can really change the perspective, because now we can act in integrity with our values. We can take responsibility for how we're showing up, but we can also say, like, there are things in the world, if you've ever heard the phrase righteous anger, there are things in the world, there are things in our lives that we absolutely deserve to be fucking angry about. And we can destroy with our anger. But if we're directing it towards evil, if we're directing it towards lies, if we're directing it towards things that are untrue, and we are destroying that which needs and deserves to be destroyed in this world, rather than lashing out in self-protection. Anger is a great example of an emotion that can be harnessed and used with integrity, used with responsibility, used in a proactive rather than reactive way, can really motivate not just action, really inspired action to make a difference.
You said it perfectly. And I want to just parse this out for a moment, because I think what you said, and I'm just going to say it in my own way, but I think I'm going to use the word like a sword as anger when I talk about this, but like an action that's going to be that's going to be incisive, that's going to be maybe destructive, that's going to be assertive. If we are only know reactive action or reactive anger, part of us knows it doesn't trust that, because we know that it's like when we get reactive, we get unconscious. And so we judge that as negative, because that's often a place of, it is destructive, and part of our brain turns off there, and we're not able to be as conscious in what we're doing. So we might think and judge all sword play, all action, all fierceness, all anger as bad or something to be avoided. And that's why it's so important for energy to feel your energy inside. Is this a reaction to a childhood wound or a disproportionate response? Is this out of my integrity? Is this just me protecting this little insecure part of me? Or is this based upon some higher values? Is this my boundaries that are rooted in my integrity? And is there a violation of that? That's an appropriate thing for us to be angry and to protect and to use a sword and to assert ourselves in those moments. And if we haven't differentiated the two, we won't be able to develop this righteous anger, this righteous sword. And I think about, I grew up a lot of my young age, my first language was Japanese. And so I have a real deep connection with Japanese culture. And the samurai that they knew, they have a phrase that says that the samurai who doesn't serve a master will eat itself and eat those all around them. And it's sort of like we need to have a higher principle that the samurai's fighting for. And that's where this word integrity comes in. And the integrity is really to values that we've created, that are internal values that we're lined up with, and that are not about just our own reactivity. And that's why that word integrity is really vital. That's why there's three, it's taking responsibility, not being reactive, and then integrity. You could start with integrity that infuses all of them. And that's why that's such a pivotal thing, because you are actually fighting for your integrity, for your values. And you're not fighting from a place of reactivity. And I think so often men, we like road rage, like that's a reactive, more 99% of the time, that's a reactivity. It's not an appropriate response in that moment to go slam your car into someone else in that moment, or to go and hit your kid because he didn't do something that you didn't like because it offended you. or a woman does something and says something wrong and you react and you flame up, if you don't learn how to differentiate it, you'll go through a stage like I did because I was so afraid of my inflamed reactivity. I just turned myself off and I became passive as a response to not wanting to be reactive. And I think many, many, many men look at their dads and their other men and they're like, I don't want to be like that because that's a reactivity that's just like hot headed. So they think, oh, I just won't act. So they start doing drugs and all these different things that put them in a more passive state so as to not assert themselves because any assertion, they haven't done the work to differentiate. So anytime they assert, it becomes reactive.
By bringing our consciousness into the world, by creating the world around us to be in the image of what we see as best.
Mm-hmm.
That's our calling, is to be ourselves and then to bring ourselves into the world to make the world a better place. But when we shut down because we're afraid of reactivity, for example, is one of the reasons, and we depolarize ourselves, so we become flatline and we aren't taking action, well, then we have to medicate ourselves. We have to
Because we're miserable.
deal with that internal abandonment of our whole fucking purpose exists when we're not taking action, or when we're taking action that's misaligned, right? If we're taking action in a way that you and I both did in very different ways that is misaligned with our truth, it's not aligned with our values, it's not aligned with our authenticity, then the action we're taking is just as bad as inaction in our system because it's not connected to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's not connected to our unique values.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not talking about an external morality here. I'm not talking about absorbing someone else's values and making them yours and trying to line your life up with an external code.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to use an external code of values, you damn well better know that it fits you perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're just running away from yourself
Mm-hmm.
again. This is the problem most people have with organized religion, is they abandon themselves and they adopt an external code and try to align their lives with it when it doesn't actually suit.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, what happens, and this is one of the phrases I wanted to talk to you about today, is if we're not taking initiative, if we're not taking proactive action towards something that matters to us in our life, and we shut down our initiation, our penetration,
Mm-hmm.
then we end up with what we have in the world a lot right now, which is a ton of men who are like, I just like to go with the flow, bro. And that go with the flow energy, that's not energy. That is reactive by nature. That's saying, I'm not going to act at all. I'm going to see what happens and then go with that.
Let's freeze.
It's freeze, it's avoidance, it's
Fawn.
softness, and it is absolutely, it's a perfect example of what feminine expression.
Mm-hmm.
Because a woman who's in a feminine expression very much go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're afraid of your masculinity, you're afraid of your reactivity, afraid of your anger, you're afraid of living with integrity, or you're afraid of taking responsibility, or you're afraid of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you shut down and you're like, well, I'll just go with the flow. I'll see what happens and I'll just kind of be mushy. Yeah, you can do that. But guess what? Never feel like a fucking man.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you. I tried it. Doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Well said. There's another word that I heard someone say one time that I really like. You know, there's fight, flee, freeze, flight, and then there's fawn. And I think that's what I think a lot of men do is they fawn in the sense of like appeasing, you know. And I think men will appease their woman, or they'll appease the situation. They don't want to ruffle any feathers. They don't want to upset anyone. They don't want to, they fawn, you know, like placate. And I think
Mhm.
if you are a man and you grow up, or a boy with a dad or with around other men who never stand up for themselves to their women, or stand up to themselves against life, it's demoralizing. And you don't trust that in yourself. And I think you have to develop that part of you that will be able to say this and no further. And it's not from a reactive state. It's from a place of integrity, from a place of non-reactivity, a place of taking responsibility for the inner wounds and inner child to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to react in a way that's too much in this situation. So I'm going to remove myself. It's not like, of course, we're always going to have parts of it and things that might create reactivity. I think it's important. And part of taking responsibility is to know if I put myself in that situation, I'm going to react in a way that's not going to be helpful. And that's where part of taking responsibility is like, I know that if I go and get around these people, I'm going to want to punch them, or I'm going to want to drink, or I'm going to want to do things that are not helpful to my marriage or to whatever the situation is. You take responsibility for that part of you that's reactive. You don't put yourself unnecessarily in situations where that's going to be. That's also part of it. It's not to say that's wisdom, that's life, you know? And I think that's where they all three really kind of fold in on themselves, and they don't work in isolation. All three of those, take responsibility, being non-reactive, and having integrity, they're all, it's not like this thing and then this thing and then this thing. It's like they're all stacked on each other as the field that we live in as men. If you just did those three things, I feel like you could turn your life around.
I think this word like initiation is so important because you are, again, back to the non-reactivity or proactive. You are either happening to your life or your life is happening to you. There's no in between. It's a great place to start for men who are trying to take more responsibility, more ownership of their life, to look at what like, every piece of my life, every moment of my day, when I wake up, for example, am I setting out on a course that I've laid out for my day, or am I reacting to what happened? Do I have a plan? Or am I seeing what fires flare that I have to put out? And look at the little things, right? I love vehicle for this, like as an analogy for life. This, do you know exactly when you changed your oil last? And do you have a plan for when you are going to change your oil next? Or are you just waiting for the little light to come on in your car and go, ding, you need to change your oil, and then you'll get around to it sometime? Do you have a fucking plan for your life, or are you reacting to your life? If you can start taking initiative in the little thing, in the smallest, making a plan, following that plan. This is why Jordan Peterson talks about cleaning your room. And people kind of laugh at him like, no, like actually take initiative for something like empty out your sock drawer, throw away all the singles, throw away all the ones that were one of the two has a hole in them, buy yourself a few new socks, fold them up nicely and put them back in that drawer. And then every time you open that drawer, you have a reminder that you took initiative in your life. And that's a big fucking deal. It's not a little deal.
I couldn't agree with you more, my friend. That word initiative also is an initiative. You know, like if you're going to take initiative, you also become a part of an initiative. Like there's an initiative, like it's an action that's introducing you and bringing you into a new mode of being, a new way of being. You know, like an organization can be an initiative. You also, to be initiated into a society or a culture or into something, is also part of that word. And so I think that word, I love that you keep bringing that up, because to me, it's like grace, where there's like multiple layers of meaning to it, all of which are applicable to what we're speaking about. And I think this wonderful word, if you do those three things, not being reactive, being in your integrity, taking responsibility, and you take action, you're taking initiative and you are initiated into a remembrance of yourself. Like you become more who you are. We're not saying be some idealized version of some external thing of what you think man is. You get to be you, which if you are a man or masculine energy is a man that's unique and beautiful and awesome and has its own unique capacities. And I think part of that is for us to differentiate ourselves from women and also from technology. Like there also needs to, I think technology is a really interesting thing now. Yes, you can, not to say completely separated, but just like you said about your day, be intentional in your use of technology. Be intentional in how or if we're using technology to avoid feeling the feelings that we don't want to feel. And then we'll get locked in. And technology, the danger of technology is it's really, really easy to be externally controlled by technology. If you're locked in to a group thing, it's so much easier to be a part of a group think.
These things help to build a sense of courage, right? Taking responsibility, taking ownership, like not letting technology control your life, but happening to your life rather than letting life happen to you, which absorbing a lot of information through technology, mindless scrolling, like doom scrolling, looking for like reading things that you agree with and then reading things you disagree with so you can rage at them. And you know what, all the different ways that we can mindlessly and unconsciously be controlled by our technology. They also keep you from living a courageous life. Courage is built through doing. Courage is built through taking action in spite of fear. So if you're letting your fear control you rather than taking action in spite of your fear, you're going to live a cowardly life. There's nothing that builds more of a sense of confidence, more of a sense of inner strength than taking action in spite of fear. Taking action and taking responsibility and living integrity and like taking a proactive action in spite of fear, but when you know that it's the right thing to do. And that fuels your confidence, it fuels your self-respect, it fuels your sense of being in a dominant frame in your life where you know that whatever comes your way, not only handle it, but you're going to absolutely crush it. And you're going to make everything in your life better when it touches. And that's really what I want to experience in my life is I want to experience everything that passes through to be better for having connected with, whether it's somebody who listens to me on a podcast, whether it's someone who consumes our stuff on Instagram, whether it's someone who reads what I write, meets me in person, whatever it is. I want everyone who crosses paths with to be better. Well, that means I need to be able to take courageous action towards what matters to me. And I can't do that if I'm letting myself be controlled by things like technology, letting myself be controlled or reactive to my life. And proactive in everything.
I agree. I think what you said there too makes me feel like that word intentional is a really important, you could say dominance or you could say intentional, conscious intentionality, living an intentional life. And what is it that you're intending? What are you serving? I think the result is dominance. And I think sometimes people lead with dominance and they think I have to go be dominant. No, you need to go live and take responsibility, go live in integrity. Don't be reactive. The result of that is you become dominant. You don't go try to be dominant. You go live these ways. You take initiative. You live in integrity. You take responsibility. You're not reactive. Your woman will surrender to you and submit to you. And you didn't set out to be like, I'm going to go be dominant today.
I tell women all the time, like, If you want a dominant man, don't go look for a guy who calls himself a dom. Look for a guy who lives with integrity and follows through on his actions.
Mhm.
That guy is way more dominant than somebody who just says, yeah, I'm a dom.
Right. I mean, we call this podcast Conscious Dominance, and we talk about that just to get people listening to us. But then once they're here, it's all about like boring shit about taking responsibility, being in integrity, accountability. And that's actually not boring, because if you do all that work, that then your life can actually be all the things that you want in those fun, awesome ways, but it's built on a foundation that's not going to fall apart. And we have in our lives that an incredible woman, powerful beyond measure, and pure femininity, surrendered and submissive and desirous of us. And that's our baseline. And it's incredible. And yes, when we're out of alignment, they look at us like, what are you doing? But it's not, oh, I'm going to leave you. You could just feel from them. They're like I was talking about before, when I'm in my state, she just lets me be. She's not taking responsibility for me in that moment. She's allowing me to be in my space. And I think this journey of all of this is what this is about. And this is why we have to talk about this, you and I, because what's out there is such a superficial representation of dominance. It's like, I call myself dominant, do what I say, and be what I am. And these people are not acting from a place of integrity, nor are they acting from a place of non-reactivity. And you'll know
it's a poor man's version of self-respect.
Yeah.
When it really comes down to it, it's trying to take a shortcut to try to try to feel respect that you demand from other people, or that you expect from other people. If you're trying to use dominance as a weapon to get yourself a certain feeling or a certain experience with women that you haven't earned because you haven't done the thing that actually made her feel like you were a dominant man, so you're just trying to take a shortcut. And all of that is really a shield for the lack of self-respect that a man has. If you want to actually feel dominant, if you want her to think you're dominant, you need to actually be that way. Otherwise, you're just playing a game. And frankly, just leave her alone.
Yeah.
If that's the game that you're trying to play, is the shortcut of dominance, just leave her alone, because not only are you acting to your own self-destruction, you're destroying her at the same time by playing this pretend little game of trying to earn, or trying to feel something you haven't actually worked for. Like, if you want to be respected, be respectable. If you want to feel a woman's to actually be dominant, don't take the shortcut.
And that's with yourself.
Give you a little, right? You might get your rocks off, but you're only going to be worse off for it. And so, like, just don't. Go home and jerk off porn rather than destroying another human being in the process. If you're not going to actually do this and take some fucking ownership of your life and take some responsibility for your life and have some fucking self-respect and some respect for the women that you're interacting with, just go home. Have some self-respect. Treat yourself like you fucking have. We need this. We need a higher calling to masculinity in general, I think, in the way that we approach dominance. Like, don't call yourself a dom until somebody else calls you that. Try that approach. Rather than calling yourself a dom, try to show up like one. Try to be that solid and that strong until some woman's like, "And you are really dominant." Then you'll actually feel like you are, rather than just trying to use it like a false identity.
No, truth. I mean, that's been my struggle this last year, even on this, showing up to this podcast. I felt like, because of the struggles I was going through, I was like, who am I to be calling myself a dom? Ridiculous. But it was in those doubts, in that struggle, that I really learned what we're talking about right now. that I really got to differentiate and like separate the old paradigm of dominance with a new paradigm of dominance. And it came through the fire, like burning this notion of like, oh, this is what it has to look like. And it feels, and it reminds me so much of like where when you're a part of a culture, like if you grow up, like because I grew up partially in Japan, I look at culture really interesting. A lot of the way people are, it's just cultural. They get locked in thinking that's the way to be. And that's why it's so important to travel, because we don't have to be what we think we have to be. You could actually be yourself. And that might look different than what the culture, your culture's version of masculinity is. I think that's a really important thing. You know, when I went to Argentina and I met those men and they came up to me and they kissed me and they hugged me and it was so different than the men that I had been around. And I was like, these men are very masculine, but they had showed affection in a way that was very different. And then I went to Japan and there was a different version of masculinity in Spain and then in England and in Russia and all over the world. There's different ways that this expression can be expressed. And I think this day and age, we don't have to be in our culture's masculinity. Like we can actually learn from other cultures. And one of, you know, for me, I feel like one of the most helpful, the Japan's stoicism, yes, it can be toxic at times, but for me has been an antidote to my natural tendency, which is to be overly reactive, has actually been this incredible counterbalance for me in my system of being more and more having my own inner monk and more inner samurai qualities. I really look to that culture as, and it's also brought me back home to myself, something that the culture I was in when I was very young, I felt a lot of affinity to. I didn't fit in. I was called Rambo and I was the gaijin, and I was literally so wild that they had to have take a teacher that was the teacher my first year in the kindergarten in Japan. I was the only gaijin in the class. The next year, no other teachers wanted to teach me, so she had to follow with me. I still love this woman to this day. She stayed with me. And there were times when my mom had to come to school and sit with me because I would just act up. I didn't know how to behave in that culture. And that wildness that was in me, I didn't know the boundaries. In Japan, what's interesting is that they allow in the kindergarten to be extra wild. But I didn't know I was a little too extra wild. And they're just sitting in classes and they put on plays, they cook, and you go gardening and you hike. I loved Japanese kindergarten. It was incredible. I bring this all up because there's more to meets the eye of all of us, that we have access to these different cultures and different ways of being. And I think sometimes, like for myself, I had this vision and this thing I thought dominance had to look like. I was like, I don't fit in that. Like I'm this artist and I'm creative and beyond, and just kind of a little bit more wild. I have a wild side and it doesn't really fit into all of this. And I look at you and you're just so still. I'm just like, so I had to really find my own way through this. And that's where these principles and these guiding, these pillars and these books are these pillars. They literally hold the foundation. And then when we flower and we come into our own, it can look very different. So don't get stuck, to all the listeners out there, that it has to look a certain way. That's often a superficial version of it. The actual reality of it is not being reactive, living in your integrity, taking responsibility, and showing up in the world where people are actually surrendering and submitting to you in a way where you're not controlling them. It just happened because of your presence. And that's when you feel this amazing feeling that's just like, oh my God. It's like a horse whisperer. It's not coming in and being an asshole so they comply with it.
Especially not in day-to-day life.
Right.
Right. You might still play those games.
Yeah, but you're doing it consciously. It's not out of a reactive. Sometimes you need to go be an asshole.
And sometimes it's fun to play those games in the bedroom. Right. You're not giving up the joy and the thrill
right.
You need to have more tools in the tool belt
Right.
than what just might work in a bedroom scene. But I think in all of what you're saying there is authenticity. You have to do it your own unique way. You have to really, if you're going to look at other cultures, if you're going to look at religions, if you're going to look at outside of yourself, we need to have things reflected back to us, because some things are going to feel right. And you have to take what works for you and let everything else go, because the only way it's ever going to feel truly embodied is if you are doing your own thing. Otherwise, it's just, you're always going to feel for yourself like you're playing a part, like you're playing a role, like you're just acting out. Okay, I'm going to be a Dom. Okay, a Dom does these things. I'm going to do those things. And none of it is you being you. All of it is you just like playing a part in a play. You're acting. So learn from cultures, learn from books, learn from wherever. Take what really feels aligned for you and let go of everything else, and keep trying to come home rather than trying to go out there and play some other parts, so that the actions you take then are coming from having a deeper and deeper connection to the man that you are. And that is how you become truly dominant, is by taking action from an embodied sense, embodied confidence in who you are. And that all comes from these three things here, from responsibility, from non-reactivity or proactive, and from having integrity. And it's a process. I mean, people ask me all the time about this stuff. I'm like, you're looking at 10 plus years intentional personal growth work when you look at, you're not looking at somebody who started this way, but you're also like, you didn't know the guy who was, I'm 44 now. You don't know the guy who was 34 and who was 85 pounds heavier than I am right now, and who was miserable. And you don't know that. Just see this. This is what is possible. No matter where you're starting from, if you do things you're sharing here.
Oh, it's truth. I mean, you're speaking truth. And it's coming from someone on the other side of a lot of work and a lot of struggle. It feels amazing on the other side. And it's not an amazing that someone can take away. I was taking about these couple of weeks where I was going through these dark nights. My resting place, my normal space, no longer has a hum of worthlessness. There's no hum. There's no background noise. It's actually really solid. I'll have these moments where I'll feel an immense grief or an immense feeling and wave of what's happening, and I'll just feel a lot. And it's very intense, but it lasts a very short amount of time and with great intensity. And I have to just sit there and be with that. And then it's almost like it alchemizes. I learn stuff from it. It's teaching me something. And I don't sit there and I'm like, oh, woe is me, I'm the victim. And sometimes if that's happening, I'm recognizing that. And I'm not acting from that place, though. I'm not letting it lead me or make decisions from that place. And I think that you've been a really wonderful confidant and example for me, and somebody that I could talk to. I mean, this entire podcast was born out of us having these conversations privately and really showing up to each other and to be like, hey, look, from this place of accountability, of integrity, of non-reactivity. I mean, those three themes have been a big part of what everything that we do and that we talk about. And I feel like that's been really important. And I really appreciate you and appreciate your example, and just this continuing to show up to this podcast. It's been a wonderful journey, and I love that we're going to be bringing this. We're in a new season now, and we're going to keep going. And yeah, just really grateful for all that's come so far, and then all the listeners that are out there listening. So thank you as we wrap this up.
Thanks for having me, and it's always a pleasure. Look forward to the next one.
Thank you.